Hey guys, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And what we're going to talk about is you're writing all of these new .NET 8 apps, where should you be hosting them? If you're writing web apps, the best place to host them is on Azure App Service. If you're participating on any of these hackathons, Hack Together, the other thing that you can take advantage of is the fact that we have a free tier, and you can host your .NET 8 apps on Windows or Linux for free. Obviously, there's some limits, like you get a certain amount of CPU and memory per day, but you can run up to 10 apps on Windows and about 10 apps on Linux absolutely for free. That has been there for 10 years. So if you're participating in any of these Hack Together events, that's a great way to just throw your project, whatever you're doing to learn, host it on the free app, and that's enough to get you started. And now, the reason I'm here and the reason why I do my talk on day 2 is because usually on day 1, I'm the guy basically chasing after the team, making sure that we have .NET 8 release across the board. So as of yesterday, we have .NET 8 GA bits available on App Service, Azure Functions, static web apps across all regions. Everybody should have it right now. The way we do this is through a just-in-time install mechanism. So we stage the bits there, and if your app is configured to run .NET 8, it will download and run the GA bits. If you're using a function, that usually adds a little bit to the cold start. So what's happening right now is we're going and we're filling in and we're doing another 5-day deployment that actually goes and touches every worker to now burn the bits in so that they're locally available on that app. When we're done with that by the end of the week, that cold start goes away, but it means that you can start hacking as of yesterday. If you want to learn more about App Service in general, we have a blog. That's the link right there. And you can also follow us on X. That's AC App Service. And this is the product team tweeting. It's not a marketing thing. So like real content, real stuff going in there. I have a couple other announcements to get out of the way. Also new this week is we have the support for GitHub Actions OpenID Connect. So what this means is when you create a web app and you have it linked to automatically deploy from GitHub, you can use a managed identity. So in this way, you're not having to store credentials on the GitHub site to then go publish into the web app. It's all done through federated identity. This is great, especially if you're a bigger company where you want to have more stringent controls on security. You can disable basic auth and you can enforce it through policy. So there's no plain text credentials, and all of the auth from GitHub publishing into your web app is done through managed identity. I'm going to show that in the demo coming up. We also have GA of gRPC support on App Service Linux. gRPC is a protocol that is very efficient, and it lets you do some interesting scenarios, especially with AI. So a lot of people today are building chatbots, and if you send a request and you know that the chatbot is going to take a couple of seconds to reply, if you're doing traditional HTTP requests, you need to do a 201 continuation, and you need to manage that all by yourself. gRPC, because it supports the bidirectional streaming, it lets you send the request back and then stream the request back to the client without having to do that HTTP continuation song and dance. So this is something that is GA. It's available on App Service Linux. It doesn't matter if you're doing .NET, Java, Node, Python. If your language and framework supports gRPC, you can host that backend on App Service, and you can talk to that client on your front end. Also, the other thing that I forgot to mention on the previous slide, I know it's .NET Conf and it's .NET Day, but we also just released support for Python 3.12 and Node 20 LTS on App Service. So that's something else to go play with. The other thing is we've seen a lot of focus in the last couple of months around application migrations. So these are people that are, you have your code still running on data centers, and you have this serious problem of how do you save costs, how do you move those that code, that legacy code, into the cloud and not only save costs, but then start doing modernization of the applications. And to do that, there are a bunch of tools that you can use to help you, one, discover and inventory what apps you have. And you can do this with the AppCat tool across both Java and .NET. There's also static code analysis that will assess your application and give you pointers for things that you'll have to change if you're moving to the cloud. An example of that is, for example, if you're talking to a local database, well, you're going to have to change that to talk to a database that's in the cloud. Or if you're using something like Windows Auth that doesn't necessarily work on the cloud, you might need to change that to something else. So you have discovery of the application, assessment with a clear indications of what are the things that you need to change to make that app compatible with the cloud. And then finally, the workflow to migrate it into Azure. So you have basically support every step of the way to get you into Azure, into a place where you can now start doing modernization of your app without even necessarily touching the code. And I'm going to get a little bit into that with my demos. And then some other stuff that is coming soon is we've had support for web jobs on Windows App Service forever. And now we're bringing that both to App Service Linux as well as Windows containers. So if you're not familiar with web jobs, it allows you to have an executable that is not triggered by an HTTP request. So a traditional web app, the web app is only doing something if there's an active request coming into the app. So with web jobs, you can do background processing stuff. And this can be either triggered. So for example, you can have a cron expression that says, every Wednesday, go and parse the logs and summarize them. Or you can have things that are manually executed, where you want to say, I need to do a database cleanup. I only want to run it when I want to execute that web job. And you go into the portal and click run. So we're bringing that to Linux and Windows containers. That was a feature gap that we had between Windows and Linux, but now it's getting plugged. The people that are in the early user access preview will start seeing this coming in before the end of the year, and we expect the rest of our app service customers to get it sometime early next year. The next one is support for sidecars on App Service Linux. What this means is on App Service Linux, all of your apps, it doesn't matter if you're deploying code or if you're deploying a Docker container, on our side, we all see them as Docker containers. And sidecars allowed you to specify additional containers that will run alongside your main container app. One of the interesting scenarios that lights up with this is things like Datadog, New Relic, where you can add functionality to your app without touching your app's code. You just have a sidecar container that is running the third-party code, or it can even be your own code as well, that have that shared networking namespace, and they can interact together. So this way, you can basically start using Datadog to extract telemetry from your application. Again, this is a feature that is going into early user access preview this year, and then start rolling out to general audience early next year. Along with that, there's also end-to-end TLS encryption. So if you're familiar with App Service today, all of your TLS is terminated at the front end, and then it goes from the front end to your worker. So this is enabling you to have the TLS termination happen all the way down to your worker. And I know that there are some customers that are looking for that. Also coming soon, probably this year. And then TLS 1.3 support, the next version of TLS, we're actively deploying the backend to support this. We expect it to be done before the end of the year. So this, again, one of those that will light up early next year. And because we have dueling conferences right now, we have a session at Ignite that's going to go do a little bit of more demos geared towards web jobs and sidecars. So that's the name of the session right there. I'm going to throw it on. I'm going to throw a link to the session as well on Twitter. Go check it out. Really great demo coming up, showing some of like the cutting edge stuff that we have coming up. Okay, so that wraps it up for slides. Let's go into the demos. Okay, let's start right here. So this is the Azure portal. And one of the new things that we're releasing this week is the ability to create databases as part of your web app creation flow. We know that for traditional web applications, about 95% of them end up talking to a database. And sometimes, creating the resources is not the hardest part, but actually getting them to configure and talk to each other in a secure way, that is where all the brain power goes. So just to show you a little bit, and we're going to do the kitchen sink trick here. So I'm going to create a random web app. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to select, because I can, .NET 8. You see that's with the early access moniker right now. That means we're still in the JIT phase that I described earlier. You should see that early access go away probably by the end of the week. And that's when the .NET 8 bits are fully baked in, so you don't get that little cold start penalty. We can select Windows or Linux. In this case, I'm going to go with Linux. And over here, I'm going to create a new app service plan. And I'm going to show you something else, which is the new pricing tiers that we have. So this is not new for this conference, but it's relatively new as well, is we have the new P0v3 instance size, which gives you a premium small instance. This one is giving you 1 core. If you're cost sensitive, this is a great option for you. And on the higher end, we also have the memory optimized SKUs, where you can get up to 256 gigs of RAM. So if you want to cram multiple applications, or you have one application that uses a lot of memory, you have options. For this one, I'm just going to go with the P0v3 option and move forward. So you'll see the first thing that will start popping up is you'll see the option to select the database. You can say, yes, I want to create a database. And we do a little bit of affinitization, right? So if you select .NET, we will recommend you to use SQL, because that's what most developers are going to be using. But if you go and select something else, like, for example, we talked about Python 3.12 right there. I go to the database, and I will see that my recommended one is Postgres, because Python developers like to use Postgres. But let's go back. This is a .NET demo, so let's go back to .NET. There we go. I'm going to go back to the database. I'm going to select SQL. And now here's where a little bit of the magic happens. I'm going to skip deployment for now. But now I'm in the networking tab. By default, we don't deploy your web app into a VNet unless you explicitly tell us to do it. But because here I'm selecting a database, I want to make sure that my configuration is secure by default. So what that means is the web app is the only publicly accessible endpoint. So if I'm on the public internet and I'm trying to access the resources of my application, the only thing I can see is the web application. The database and the web application are going to be deployed to the same VNet, and they're going to be talking to each other over something that's called the private endpoint, which means literally the only thing that can talk to the database is going to be my web app. I don't need to open firewall rules, or I don't need to set any exceptions. That's by default. Later on, if I want to, for example, connect to it from my dev box, I can add the firewall exception and then take it away just when I'm doing the database stuff. So that's one of the powerful things here, which is we're giving you that secure by default configuration by default out of the box without you having to necessarily learn all the ins and outs of it. I'm going to move forward to the review and create. And then this is another really powerful thing, which is not only are you getting the option to go and create the database here, and you can see all of the information, but if you want to learn how this works, one of the things that you can do is you can open you can see the template that we would be executing for you. For some reason, that link is not working right now, but you can click here, and it will give you the ARM template, which is think of it as the infrastructure as code definition, so you can see exactly how all the different resources that get created are stitched together. If I go back over here, I'm not going to go through the create process. That's going to take 20 minutes because it needs to create all of those multiple resources that I said. But let's go over here to the web app demo. And you can see all of these different resources that got created for me. So there's the app service plan, there's the web app, database, server, the private endpoint, the VNet, etc. So very, very powerful. If you're not doing this through this template and you need to go create every resource individually, it's going to take you about an hour. This would take you about 20 minutes. So very, very powerful stuff. Now let's go into the web app. You'll see a couple new things that we have coming out. One of them is the new environment variables experience. App settings and connection strings used to be part of configuration, but we've had feedback that a lot of people, the way they think about it is environment variables, so that's the name that makes sense. We're pulling it out to just make it a little bit more of a focused experience. This is purely just UI sugar. It has an easier navigation where you don't have to go click new every time. You can just basically go edit settings in the flow. If you're a fan of the advanced edit feature, that's still there. The other really cool thing that we do with the workloads database is we're using Service Connector. So Service Connector allows us to not only establish that relationship between the database and the app, but it can also monitor it for us. So for example, right now, I can do this, and I can ask it to validate that this is working. So this way, I'm not seeing credentials. And what's happening is it's actually running a process inside of the worker where my code is running to test whether the app itself is able to reach the database. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do unless you're like SSH into the box. So this is really cool. I can see that this is working, so I can rule out that it's a password issue or a network issue that is making it so that I can't reach my database. Very, very powerful stuff. And then just to basically show that this is for real, let's go to this other web app. And, sorry, I'm going to go back. I wanted to show the deployment center and talk a little bit about that OIDC configuration that I called out. So I'm in this Azure subscription that is provided by Microsoft that is locked down by policy. So the first thing that you will see is that when I select GitHub, it will tell me that, hey, the basic auth flow is disabled for this application. You need to use user-assigned identity. And when I go over here, I can still select the demo that I want to do and point it to all of that stuff. But I also have the option over here to use basic auth that I know that it won't work because of that error up there. Or I can do the user-assigned identity. And this will go and not only create the user-assigned identity that I'm going to use to authenticate my app from GitHub, but it's also an identity that is restricted so that it only has permissions to this particular application. It doesn't have permissions to all of my Azure subscription. So that's really locked down. So I'm not going to wait for the deployment to happen. I'm going to switch over to an app that I already have deployed. And we're going to look at it. Just hit Browse. There we go. So this is a .NET 8 app running on .NET 8 on app service. The other way to validate that is I can go, for example, SSH. And this is a question that I get often, which is, how do I know what runtime is on my app? Sometimes people go to kudu and they get confused. The right way to do this is you SSH into the app, and this is actually the container where your app is going to be running. And you can do .NET info, and it'll show you right there. These are GA bits. How did this get deployed? Well, we have I set up the deployment center that created a GitHub action. You can see that the GitHub action got executed over here. We can go into the build, set up .NET Core. So this is basically proving that it's setting it up with .NET 8. And then when I go over here to my code, this is what's actually getting deployed, right? So this is pulling the string of what framework is coming from the runtime information itself. So basically real code running on .NET 8 GA bits in production in app service. And the cool thing is using Open Identity Connect, less passwords, less rotation, less management, policy enforcement, more secure, etc. OK, so now let's switch gears and talk a little bit about static web apps. You'll see a bunch of new stuff that we've done on static web apps. Static web apps is the option for you to host a static app. So in the .NET world, you can think of a Blazor WASM application. If you're familiar with static web apps, you've seen that over the last couple of months, we've updated the new overview page. And what I want to show here is this is my static web apps code. This is literally just like a very simple WASM, the default WASM template, and I've added an API. That API is basically just an Azure function that is going to be running and executing alongside my static web app. So in general, if you have static content and you want to add some dynamic that is server-side rendered, you need to do a bunch of stuff to call another service hosted somewhere else. For one or two APIs, that's sometimes overkill. So you can always just add a little one or two functions to your static web app to have that dynamic content that is server-side rendered. And you can always grow up from that scenario by then connecting to a full-fledged backend that can be either a web app, API management, container apps, functions, etc. Then this is the code for my function. So you're going to see that I'm doing basically the same thing, just calling the framework description to demonstrate that this is actually running on .NET 8. And here we go. So this is, you'll be familiar with this. This is the standard Blazor app. And when I click on weather, you'll see this loading that then is pulling the framework description, proving that it's running on .NET 8, executing my function behind the scenes. Now, one of the killer features of static web apps is the ability to create revisions. On your regular web apps, you're maybe familiar with staging slots. Staging slots are resources that you need to manage. So you need to create the staging slot, then you need to have the discipline to deploy to the staging slot, swap into production. On static web apps, there is a similar concept, which is environments. Environments, you don't need to manage them in the sense that you don't create the environment and then deploy to it. But what happens is you have your GitHub action, you have your GitHub, and you can create a pull request. The pull request will automatically then create a revision. So you have that deployment to a staging slot that is fully accessible. So you see here, this is the same. If you look at the URL, you'll see that it's the same app with a slightly different URL. But it's hosted on the same app. So now I have a different view. I have a little bit of text just to have fun with it. We do love Blazor. And it's still executing the function, pulling the runtime information, and dynamically displaying it. And then the other thing that I can do here, because I have this multiple staging slots and multiple versions of my code running side by side, is I can add traffic splitting. So let's say that I'm a betting man. I'm going to go 50-50. So 50% chance that I'm going to see production, 50% chance that I'm going to see stage. And then, so this is a new feature that we're literally just rolling out. So I can select my staging environment. We're at 50-50. I'm going to go to production. And then I'm going to bring out my dev tools. And we're going to look at the cookies. So right now I have a cookie that is being set. I'm going to take that cookie away, and I'm going to hit refresh. And now I'm seeing a different version of the app on the same URL. So this is doing the automatic 50-50 splitting. I'm going to remove that cookie again, roll the dice, and hopefully we get the original version of the app. So now that I have the cookie, I'm pinned to it, and I see the same one, but you can see how you could set this up where you have multiple revisions, you have slices of production traffic going to them, you can validate your code, you can accept the PR, merge it into production, and then have that smooth deployment experience. And that wraps it up for me.